What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. In today's video we are checking out the latest action camera from SJCAM called the C200. This is probably one of the smallest action cameras available on the market. I would say it's about half a size of a regular action camera. This is also waterproof without a case, so you could take this in water up to 5 meters without a case. But there is a waterproof case that comes in the box with it, so if you do want to go diving with it, you would put that case on it and then you can go diving with it. This action camera can also record at the maximum resolution of 4K at 24 frames per second, and we do get image stabilization at that resolution. Okay, so in the box you're gonna find that waterproof case that I mentioned earlier. There is also a small user manual. However, if you've used an action camera in the past, well, you don't necessarily need to read that user manual. And we also have a few other mounts and stickers, so you could potentially mount this action camera anywhere. I like this particular case. So with a case like this, you basically put the camera into the case and then you can have the camera sitting on a tripod. So this could come in handy because there is no other way of attaching this to a tripod. The camera itself feels pretty premium. This is made out of metal, so it doesn't feel cheap like other action cameras that I've tried. In the past, on the front here, we have the lens. We have some holes for a microphone. We have one of the 3 buttons. So this is one button. This also has an LED around it. So whenever you're recording, that LED flashes. On the left-hand side of the camera, we have a couple of other buttons. So these are the only 3 buttons available on the camera. On the back we have a small screen, but this is not a touch screen. So every time you want to control the camera, you're going to have to touch those buttons. And we have some other holes for probably another microphone or the holes for a speaker. So that's about it for the camera. To charge it, we basically have a little plastic door on the side here. We have a USB-C charging port. This camera also supports an external microphone. It takes a couple of hours to charge this from 0 to 100, and the 1200 milliamp hour battery that's non-removable inside the camera will give you about 2 hours of recording time. Alright, so now that you've seen how the camera looks and what comes in the box, let's check out the video quality and let's check out and see how that internal microphone and the image stabilization works on it. So first I want to show you a couple of sample recordings so you can see how the internal microphone on this action camera works, so how it records sound outdoors and indoors. So let's check out those recordings and I will be right back. Alright, we have a quick microphone test to this new SJCAM camera that I'm trying out. So I'm currently recording in 4K at 24 frames per second. I am outside, as you can see for yourself. It is a bit windy, so you may hear some wind. Aside from my voice, there are a couple of birds around here as well, and some construction that way. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear that, but I just want to let you know what's around me. So this is how the internal microphone on this action camera would sound like. Alright, we're moving on to a quick indoors microphone test to the SJCAM C200. For this recording I'm doing 1080p at 30 frames per second and I'm holding the camera about 2 feet away from my mouth. This is also a pretty quiet room, but also a fairly empty room, so you're probably gonna hear a bit of echo aside from my voice. But yeah, this is how the C200 would pick up the sound in this kind of an environment. Alright, so as you've heard for yourself, the sound recordings from the internal microphones are actually better than a lot of action cameras that I've tried in the past. And taking into consideration the price of this camera, because it is a fairly affordable camera, I was pleasantly surprised. Next, we're going to move on and check out and see how the image stabilization works. So with this camera, you get image stabilization at all resolutions. So you can do 4K at 24 frames per second, you can do 1080p at 60 frames per second, 1080p at 30 frames per second, and you do get image stabilization at all those resolutions. So let me show you some sample recordings so you can see how that image stabilization works basically. So let's check those out and I will be right back. Moving on to a quick walking and running test in 1080p at 60 frames per second. So of course I have the image stabilization turned on and I'm walking quite normal, I'm gonna say. So I'm trying to keep the camera as steady as possible. I'm also gonna start running so you can see how that image stabilization does while running. And I'm gonna stop somewhere around here. So 1080p at 60 frames per second. For our next walking and running test, I am recording in 4K at 24 frames per second, and once again I do have the image stabilization enabled at this resolution. When we get to this tree, I'm gonna start running, so around here. just so you can see how the image stabilization does while running. And we're gonna stop somewhere around here. And I'm also gonna do the exact same test, but recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second. And once again, I do have the image stabilization turned on. We're gonna start running somewhere around here. I'm gonna stop, we'll walk normal for a bit, and run once again. So yeah, this is how recording and the image stabilization would work at 1080p at 30 frames per second. .1080p, 30 frames per second, and of course the image stabilization is enabled. It is a bit windy and I'm walking fairly fast, but trying to hold the camera as steady as possible. Okay, so as you've seen for yourself, the image stabilization isn't that great, mostly compared to other action cameras that I've tried in the past. If I would be to compare this to a GoPro, well, the image stabilization from this one is far from great. If you're just gonna stand there and hold the camera like this, pan left and right will do okay. But if you walk, if you run, the image stabilization just doesn't do that amazing. Next, we're gonna move on and check out some sample recording so we can talk about the video quality. So inside this camera, we have the Novatec 96660 chipset. And that chipset doesn't actually support 4K recordings. So all the 4K recordings that you're gonna be getting from this action camera will actually be upscaled 1080p recordings. So if you'd be to buy a camera like this, I highly recommend recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second because I feel that that is the best resolution for an action camera like this. However, I'm going to show you all the resolutions that I've filmed over the past few days. So let's check out those recordings and I will be right back so we can talk about them. Moving on to another quick recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second. Of course, at this resolution we get image stabilization, and I do have the image stabilization enabled. We're just gonna walk towards the car here, this way you can see how that image stabilization works if you're walking on this kind of terrain. And I guess we're gonna stop somewhere around here. We're gonna pan left and then back right. So yeah, 1080p at 30 frames per second. We are moving on to a quick 4K at 24 frames per second recording with this action camera. At this resolution we do have image stabilization, and I'm also riding the bicycle. It is a bit windy, so you're probably gonna hear some wind aside from my voice. The road here is nice and smooth, so the footage should look quite smooth as well. So this is how recording in 4K at 24 frames per second would look like under these conditions. So on a sunny day but a windy day. Next we have a 1080p at 60 frames per second recording with this action camera. Once again, it is super sunny. I am riding the bicycle on the same super smooth road, and I have the image stabilization enabled at this resolution. So 1080p at 60 frames per second. We'll go a bit faster just so you can see how that image stabilization does. I think we'll turn right somewhere around here, and left, and right, and we'll do left somewhere here once again. So yeah, 1080p at 60 frames per second on a super sunny day. We are moving on to a quick 4K at 24 frames per second recording with this new SJCAM that I'm trying out. Of course, I have the image stabilization enabled for this recording, and I'm walking fairly normal, nice and slow, and I'm trying to keep the camera as steady as possible. We're gonna stop here, we're gonna pan left slowly, and back right. So yeah, 4K at 24 frames per second. Next we have a 1080p at 30 frames per second recording with this new SJCAM that we are trying out. Of course, I have the image stabilization enabled at this resolution, and once again I am walking normal, and I'm trying to keep the camera as steady as possible. We are walking towards my bike there. I guess I'm gonna stop somewhere around here. We're gonna pan left slowly. And we'll walk this way. So yeah, this is how a recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second with this action camera would look like. On a pretty sunny day, of course. We are moving on to another quick recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second. For this recording, of course, I have the aiming stabilization turned on. Now, compared to the earlier recordings, this time is not as bright out. So we are just before sunset, so not as much light out, but I wanted to show you how the video quality is under these conditions. We're gonna stop here. I'm gonna pan left, so towards this mountain, hill, whatever you wanna call this. I guess we'll walk this way. So yeah, this is how a recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second would look like. And we're moving on to another low light recording, but for this one we are doing 1080p at 30 frames per second, and of course I do have the aiming stabilization enabled for this recording as well. I'm gonna stop here for a second. We're gonna pan right. And we'll keep walking straight. So yeah, 1080p at 30 frames per second. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're gonna be recording in 4K, that's just upscaled 1080p. If you're doing 1080p at 60 frames per second, the quality decreases quite a lot. So I feel that the best recordings that I was able to get from this action camera were 1080p at 30 frames per second. So you're probably better off to just record in 1080p at 30 frames per second. It seems that the video quality is better at that resolution, and even the aiming stabilization seems to work slightly better at that resolution. For pictures, well, of course you can take pictures with this. This is a camera after all. I'm not gonna say that the pictures are great or bad. They're somewhere in between, about average for an action camera, I would say. But if you have a cell phone, well, a smartphone in your pocket, your smartphone will probably do better for pictures than this action camera. Alright, so to quickly conclude this video, if you're looking for a small action camera and also an affordable action camera that's waterproof without a case, this would make sense if you plan on recording in 1080p. If you do plan on recording in 4K, maybe this is not the best option for that, because those 4K recordings don't look that amazing. But for 1080p and for the price, I think that it does decent enough. Not to mention that it does look quite cute. Alright guys, hopefully this video was useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.